your benefit. All right, well, we might start the meeting formally and start recording. Thank you.
We are recording now.
Could I just advise that we don't have Luke?
He's turned his camera off.
There he is.
Oh, Luke's turned his camera off. He's in, but he's turned off. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the 2020 meetings of the Energy Charter Independent Accountability Panel, and to you, Andrew Bills from CS Energy. In starting the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Andrew, I think you know the panel, but I'm Claire Petrie, the Chair and the former Energy and Water Ombudsman New South Wales, Cassandra Goldie, the CEO of ACOS, and Andrew Richards, the CEO of the Energy Users Association of Australia. I will hand over to you in a minute, but in doing so, I acknowledge, and it came through in all the submissions, that this has been a year unlike any other, and with fire, floods and the COVID pandemic, that's obviously had an impact on everyone, and I'm sure you'll want to talk about that. But we want to look at COVID aside, the year apart from COVID, and I'd like to hand over to you to talk about your disclosure, which we've read, thank you very much, but highlight any features that you'd like to draw to our attention, both positive and negative. So if I hand over to you for some introductory remarks, and then we can go to questions. We did send some questions to you in advance, but you can go in any direction that you like, and then we'll open it up for general discussion.
Yeah, sure. Look, just to preface, you know, we're a government-owned corporation in Queensland, got significant generation capacity, around 30-odd% of the market. We've got, and we also trade the output of Gladstone Power Station as well as our own things, and we've diversified into renewable energy over the last couple of years. Significantly, we've got a joint venture with Alinta in terms of been probably the most successful new market entry I've seen into Southeast Queensland. That's sitting at around 220,000 residential customers. We retail directly to large and industrial customers, and that's a growing. We've got about 9–10% of the market in Queensland. When I think about the last year, and I think about my experience with the last disclosure report and the IAP, there's sort of three things I'd like to draw out. One was we engaged, and it's in our report, we went and sat down with our customers and went through an exhaustive survey process and got someone independent to drive that for us. Out of that has come a list of actions, some really positive reinforcing things around some attributes that we provide, whether it's the price or whether it's the service they're getting, but there's identified a range of issues that we can improve. And we are now investing in those areas around, you know, the portal billing issues, and we're investing in to correct those. So I think that's a significant milestone for us, because it's really about recognising developing our strategy based on what the customer is saying. So listening to the customer and developing our strategy around that. I think the second thing I'd like to emphasise is we also have expanded significantly our offerings to customers. So, and it was one of the observations from the interview last year was we sort of undersold the role that we provide as an intermediary in managing market risk and also the transition. And if I think about the speed and the acceleration of the transitions that's occurring in the market through to the renewable future, we have a significant role to help navigate that for customers. And we've really recognised that and actually expanded what we're offering as a result. And our customers are really appreciating that. So that's been a significant shift for us. And I think that's been something which has been pleasing to see. The third thing, and the other sort of extension is just around one of through the JV we have with Alinta, one of the things that came out is, you know, what are we doing around looking and recognising of customers' affordability and actually driving change around that. We've now driven change with Alinta around that. So that is what we look at monthly. in our ops meeting with them. We track it. We're observing where the tiers are and the value and the numbers of customers, and we're driving change in that relationship as a result of what we took away from the process last year. And I think the last thing around why is that we've moved the dial on our culture. We did a survey, like we do a survey every 2 years, and we saw a 10% improvement year on year. And one of the things that's driven that has been this recognition of the role of the customer in our strategy and therefore our accountability for that. Now, you might say, well, that's pretty obvious, but bearing in mind where we've come from in our origins as a generator, moving into a JV with Alinta in the last 2 to 3 years, direct owned to customers. So that shift in culture, which has been measured, has been a really pleasing thing to see. It's still got a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but the recognition that our strategy is dependent upon servicing the customer and that the customer is driving the change in the industry is relatively new for CS Energy. So for that to occur has been really pleasing. I think the other, the year that's been for me around COVID and the changes we made, we sat down with our customers and asked what did they, in terms of any issues with hardship, any concerns they had. So we engaged very early on. The AER standard of expectations, adopted those again through the JV as well. And we're continuing to monitor that. I think that's going to be a significant issue for the year ahead. That's going to be the biggest issue in the industry for the year ahead. We shortened our payment terms with suppliers. We sat down with local communities. How can we help? We gave rent relief for tenants on our land. We changed the operations, so we moved people into split shifts. We've changed the way we did our overhauls in terms of making sure that we could still run and get the work done before summer, but took it out of the heat of COVID and that May-June period. That's had significant impact for us. It's led to an increase in costs and an increase in duration of the overhauls, but we felt it was the right thing to do to manage the risk of COVID vis-a-vis what we needed to get done ahead of summer. And I think when I look at the year ahead, for me, it's continuing to manage that and then managing that transition. And we have a significant role, given that one of our coal-fired power stations is slated to nominally retire at 28. We're actively involved in that transition with the Queensland Government last year through what they call the Just Transition Working Group. We're going to take a lead role with Biloela and sit down over the next year and actually really develop that plan and what does it mean for communities, stakeholders, employees and all relevant parties. Because we feel that unless we push that and direct it, we're not going to get the movement we need. So I think, they're my takeouts. I mean, I think room to improve in terms of maturity overall, whilst I called out that culture piece, it's still got a long way to go, a hell of a long way to go. I think, recognition all through the organisation of the role of the customer is not embedded, and the metrics that we should have in place to measure that aren't embedded either. So for me, small steps, but I like the progress we've made, but I'm ambitious about where we're going overall.
So Andrew, if you were sitting here in 12 months' time, what would you like to say essentially?
I'd love to be able to see that cultural, first of all, starting with the culture, and people understand the why. So whilst they might, when you get the connection of individually where people are understanding why we're talking about customer and why it's so important, and there's that acceptance, then I know you've connected to people here emotionally, and therefore the behaviour that then follows from that is what drives the organisation and shapes the culture. We're not there yet, right? So that's what my ambition is. I also would like to see, in terms of, we've got a deliberate plan of work out of the survey that we did, and it's an investment in a range of processes and procedures and capability. I want to see that completed. I want to, when we next do that survey, that we have addressed those issues of concern, and the expanded offering that we're providing customers is being taken up, and we're growing our market share successfully on the back of that and helping customers with that transition, which I do see next year. I do really see, so whilst I talk about COVID being the big issue, the transition is accelerating at such a pace, more than we all expected. COVID's contributed to that, but I think we have such a role to navigate that for customers. The ambiguity, the uncertainty that customers face, that's where we bring the expertise and say, look, here's where we think we can take you, and it's the best way to manage your needs given what we see the future looking like. So I'd like to be able to say that we've got that with our customers next year as well.
Andrew, before I throw it open, could I just ask, and I'll ask this of all the CEOs, we know that the Energy Charter requires time, effort, resources and money from the signatory companies. Very simply, is it worth it for you? I hope the answer is yes, of course. And what do you really get out of it?
Oh, completely. Like I can just point to the two really, just what I mentioned earlier. We went and surveyed our customers and have now got a program of work directly out of the back of what happened last year in the Energy Charter. We are now changing the way the relationship with Alinta works around affordability. There are two tangible things that have happened directly as a result of our involvement in the Energy Charter. I know I just mentioned the cultural piece. So absolutely it's worth it. I have no hesitation at all being signing up to this because I believe it's the right thing. Absolutely. And it's beyond, even if you didn't have the Energy Charter, the customer is driving the change in this industry at a pace that no one has seen before. It's in our interests to recognise that and place the customer at the centre of what you do, right? The industry needs that as a whole, otherwise it's not a great outcome for anyone wherever they sit in the value chain. So look, that's no question for me at all.
Thank you. Andrew and Cassandra.
Andrew, do you want to go first and then come to me?
Look, I've got a million questions, but I'll ask the first one first, Andrew. We've talked a bit in the last 12 months and in the last IAP around your entire value chain and your subcontractors and everyone else that you come into contact with and how you can influence them to sort of lift them up. The obvious one for you is with Alinta Energy, who are not a signatory. And I'm just wondering, what's the conversation like with Alinta around the Charter principles and how are you embedding those principles within that JV?
Well, it's interesting. Like we can't tell them what to do, but we can lead by example. So we've changed. You think about it; they probably saw us a bit of a passive. You're just a wholesale provider of this. We've now got our fingers going. Well, actually, we want the operations meeting to look at these issues around affordability and value associated with it and actions, and we're actually got a direct interest in that. So they're now seeing a partner who's not just perhaps passive on some of those end of the value chain retail pieces. They actually got an active contributor. So I think they actually see that as I think it helps the relationship, right? Any joint venture, you need equal contribution, right? And if you're just defaulting to one person all the time, I don't think that's great for the JV. So I think they're actually pleased in some regards that it's actually got us far more involved. Sometimes they probably don't like some of where we're going. Like for example, we've started offering EV charging to our customers in our direct book. And we're now saying to Alinta, we would like to bring that to that customer base. We would like to provide that service. So we're driving that. That's not them. And we're driving the adoption of new products. So what they're seeing, I can't tell them to join the Energy Charter, but what they're seeing is a far more active participant in the retail space, not just the wholesale space, which is what they sought us for, and bringing ideas to the table which actually are driving value for the JV overall. So whether they join in the future, Andrew, I don't know. Look, Jeff and I, we had a great relationship. I talked to Jeff about a whole range of stuff. Whether they adopt it in the year ahead, it's up to them. But I think that's the best way I can give you an example of how it's had such a positive impact.
Yeah. So they're not resisting it. They're not.
No. No, but like Andrew, they've got the ability to push into the wholesale space as well, right? So they can say, okay, so yes, we're providing a particular product to manage that risk, but they can bring things into that as well. And I'm encouraging them to do that, right? For example, they own, gas-fired generation in Queensland. And I'm saying, well, why don't we look at that within the broader context, as an example?
And you're following on that, I mean, one of the other components in this is the broker sphere.
Yep.
And I know you've been quite active, or CES has been quite active in the broker code of conduct. Are you starting to see some of those? Are you starting to not force but encourage some of those principles within your broker group as well?
Oh, very much. It's something we very strongly believe in. We're very active in that space. And I think it's really important that we get that right across the industry. That's a value which is held right through the team. So, I mean, it was something that I was involved with when I was at Origin a few years ago. So, and, you know, broker standards and consistency, because at the end of the day, the customer doesn't see the broker, they see your brand. And unless you get that standard and consistency right, the customer experience is not great. So it's something which is, I'm very happy that we're taking the lead on it. We'll continue to push it. We've been participating in those education sessions, those awareness sessions. I think they're key, and we've got to keep driving it and setting the expectation with the brokers themselves. So yeah, it's a really positive thing.
Well, it's better than having the ACCC come down on top of you anyway, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Misleading and deceptive conduct. Yeah, hang on, I thought I bought this, but I got that. Hey, hang on, where were you in that? So fundamentally, totally agree.
Yes.
Thanks, Andrew. And great to meet you, Andrew.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Yeah, I was really pleased to see the initiative that you've taken with the Alinta and having the focus on affordability and vulnerability in the engagement that you're having with them. Just want to drill down into it a bit further because obviously we're really troubled by potentially effectively a tsunami of people at risk of not being able to meet the costs of their bills. We know there's that really strong connection in terms of affordability between energy bills and housing costs, which is the underlying big costs for so many people on modest incomes. So I just want to get, given where you're at in this process, what are you doing on the kind of agreement around the metrics bit? Trying to assess the scale of what the problem looks like now and what we could be facing.
So
and whether you feel like you're kind of on the front foot with that, or whether really you're trying to even just get on top of the scale of the problem.
Look, I'll come to the last bit later, but okay. We've introduced this tiering of hardship. So we're monitoring the value of and the number of customers in each tiering. That was never there previously, right? So we've now got that visibility. And then what is the actions that apply to each of those tierings in terms of the hardship program? So what information is provided, what consultation occurs, what are the steps before you go through each of those stages? So we're watching that, and we are seeing a growth in each of those tiers, right? So I agree with your language, tsunami. I think this is the biggest issue the industry is facing. It's not going to be unique to this JV. It's going to be right across the board. The economic conditions in Australia are going to deteriorate rapidly in the next year. And you're 100% correct. Pressure on household income, this is just one of a number of things. So getting it right is going to be really challenging, right? Because you've got to try and stop it before it grows. But then if people are already in that difficult situation, what are your options? I don't have the solutions, right? I absolutely don't pretend I have the solutions, but I do believe in awareness, communication, doing everything you can early to stop it from growing, what plans you can put people on, other options, what services are available through government, pointing people at all those things. That's the role we should be providing. So we are actively doing that with Alinta. They're the ones who we don't have the direct contacts. We're asking, what are you doing? So that was never there. So I think I can't give you a better example of how the Charter's contributed to a better discussion. In terms of the last piece.
Just before that, Andrew, on a bit about the sort of the way you're measuring it. This was a key issue for the panel first time round of, it's tricky, right? Getting stable metrics where we can actually have a comparative discussion about what different Charter signatories are seeing. Because you've got a collective voice here and a very particular window into the experience of households. It's very powerful what you see. And so, yes, have you managed to get some of those basic metrics? Are you able to share that with us in any shape or form as a panel as well?
I'd have to get, again, it's JV related, so if I was to share that, I'd have to get approval from Alinta, so I can ask about that. But we are looking at, value of bill, historical, current. ageing, obviously. There's data around size of house and therefore contribution to that.
Yeah.
So they're slicing and dicing it is one of the things that Alinta's going through, by the way, is an upgrade on their underlying system in the current year. So that's one of it is a slight restriction or constraint around just the visibility in some areas that they're going to get future going forward. They're in the middle of that right now. So I'll ask the question, Cassandra, in terms of whether they've got, like, what we get in our monthly reports, whether we give you that and say, well, here's what we're looking at, here's how we're managing it, what are the actions that then come out of it? I'll ask and come back to you.
Right.
In terms of the bigger question, look, I think there's a role, the industry's got a role here with government, and, the Queensland government provided that $500 relief, which I think was a great initiative. What other forms of, and I think that there's a role there for us, whether it's in our jurisdiction or other jurisdictions, about what are we seeing and therefore what things are going to make a difference in terms of household income relief, other services that can be provided. We can't solve it alone. I think that's why, I think your point's quite valid in terms of we've got a window into a household situation probably earlier than a lot of other people. How we use that information to inform policymakers and decision makers is where we can actually really contribute to avoiding the situation spiralling out of control. So I think that's where the industry can take a lead, and the Charter's a good example of that. So look, I don't know if it answers your question, but it's kind of how I see it.
Okay, no, it's good. And just on the so in terms of the what's within your power, or through the relationship with Alinta, just testing whether there's any progress on the energy efficiency front, because obviously in terms of managing the size of bills and what's within the customer's control and what's not, this is an ongoing challenge for us in the industry, I think, is who's got roles and responsibilities here to fix some of what are obvious solutions.
Correct.
To try and deal with affordability for people on low and modest incomes.
Yeah, look, it's part of it. I wouldn't say it's amplified. It's part of it, part of that information that's provided to help reduce consumption. So absolutely. Look, one of the things with the affordability piece is that if you can make a way for them to get a renewable product longer term, that's a very economic outcome, but you've got to have the ability to purchase it in the first place. So helping tackle that issue is where we've actually been trying to talk to Alinta as well, because we do have quite a renewable book that we're building, and we're like going, well, actually, there's an ability here to help solve this in another way. So, Alinta, we're not providing solar as a product, for example. So I think I'd say it's perhaps not as I've seen, obviously what I've seen in other parts of the industry around efficiency and driving messaging around that. It's got room to improve. It's part of what we provide the customer. But do we do enough? Probably not.
And one last question, Claire, and then I'll come back to you, of course. There's the individual, commitment to the principles, and then of course there's the better together bit of this work.
Yep.
And of course there's a whole lot of commercial and confidence issues, but the power will be in the collaboration. And if there was ever a time for there to be the heat, to the feet for the industry, this is one, right?
Yeah,
We're stepping above the commercial imperatives to going, actually, if we don't fix this, none of us will fix this.
Yep.
What do you see as being, because part of our role, as you know, is to provide a bit of a view of what next, an assessment of where we're at, but then a view of what could be next in terms of the power of the Charter work between you. Where do you see, if you were to put your serious effort into the better together joint work, where do you see the highest priorities being?
Well, we've taken a lead role in two areas, which are the ones that which are most closely related to us. One was the one that Andrew spoke before around brokers, so we continue to push that. The other one was around energy skills. And I think this is where, independently of the panel, but independently of the Energy Charter, I'm quite happy for it to be a part, is the whole just transition role that I spoke about earlier, and how you actually deal with the dislocation of workforces and communities and stakeholders. And we're actually taking a very lead role ourselves in this over the next year. So they're two key priorities for me. I think the communication piece, so and I think the Charter's done a really good job this year with a couple of key things. We're all in this together. And I think that's a big one for me. And we've been talking, the other one I mentioned, we've been talking extensively about is the affordability piece. And I think if there's one issue as an industry, for the reasons I just said earlier, that we can get right, it's using the information that we have to help develop policy with a state and federal level, which is going to help address it next year. What does that look like to shape in terms of a budget response if we're seeing like a real pressure on household income, ability to pay for utility bills? What should a macro government policy response look like using the information we have out of the industry? That would be the sort of stuff which would be quite strategic. Now, whether we get to that point, maybe that's too ambitious, but
Yep, it's the fine art of not spreading yourself too thin to
Correct.
get some good progress on some, tricky but really important reforms. Okay, thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Claire.
Well, in fact, that was going to be my question, Andrew, because I think the Better Together initiatives are clearly the way to go for the industry, rather than everyone working on their own, but to share that huge area of expertise and experience and resources just makes such obvious sense. And
Correct.
so it's good to hear that you have been part of that, and those initiatives are coming out. So all power, literally, to you. And things like, can you envisage ever being involved in things like collaboration for government agencies that deliver social housing, in solar or other projects, appliance replacement, all those sorts of things, to really try and break the back of the affordability issue, that people just need to use the energy, but...
Perhaps not on. I'd say appliance would probably be a step too far. I'll just be completely frank.
Yeah.
But I do believe in terms of deployment of renewable, and when you start looking at community control, and therefore we can whether it's a battery plus solar plus whatever it is, absolutely, to me that fits neatly in terms of what role we can provide working with government agencies around that, and the rest of our partners on this too. So this is not just us. This is in Queensland, this is working with Energy Queensland, and in particular in some of those regional and remote areas. You bear in mind, like where I am today, right now, in Biloela, everyone here in a regional area, they've only got one choice of retailer, which is Ergon, and being able to provide a solution to get greater control of their energy use and consumption, it's in the interests of not just our people, but everyone in this region. So, and it's a question I get all the time when I come to site about what are we doing regionally around this. So it's very much part of where I see we need to go. And it's also it's consistent with what our shareholder expects as well.
And can you talk about the Better Together initiative in terms of overcoming that commercial in-confidence and managing the barriers, and yet being as open and cooperative and collaborative as you can?
Do you want me to sort of drill into one, for example, like on the energy skills thing, for example, as what we're doing there?
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm quite happy to be quite transparent around this. Biloela will be the first regional community impacted in Queensland. So I'm not saying it hasn't already happened in Latrobe and with Hazelwood, but in terms of the closure of a power station, it's only 8 years away. In fact, you might as well say it's 7 years away, because we're nearly at the end of this year. There was some work done last year and the beginning of this year with the government on a fairly broad-based approach, but I guess it was too broad to really get into specific effective steps and policy change. So what we're going to do is take the lead on that and bring together the Banana Shire Council, local Biloela business communities, unions, and all the other stakeholders. And we're going to take the lead, and we're going to fund that ourselves to actually, what are the policy issues that need to be addressed that we can't solve, that is going to help that transition. So the dislocation of people What does it mean to property, business? And what are the things that are going, and therefore we can then sit down with the state government and go, right, we can solve this, but we can't solve this, this, and this. And this is where you're going to need to come in. And you're going to need to help develop policies, whether it's retraining, whether it's moving people, attracting industries, whatever it is, we're going to need that. Because otherwise, when this place shuts, the impact is going to be catastrophic. And it's preventing that from occurring is my objective, which is why I believe we've got to take a lead position. So linking it back to the Better Get Together initiative, you can see why I and CS Energy are quite happy to take a very lead role in that and share that across the industry, because we're the ones who are going to come to that cliff before a lot of other players in the charter.
Thanks, Andrew. Now, I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I don't want us to run out before we get as many questions in as possible. So, Andrew or Cassandra?
Andrew, you probably started to answer one of my questions, and as if we don't have enough challenges already, but net zero emissions by 2050. And I think you're touching on there around the inevitability of coal exiting the system and that impact. And I guess what I'm hearing is you're beginning to understand not only your role in the energy ecosystem, but in the broader community as well. I think a lot of businesses are starting to come to that. So that's the sort of the glass half empty kind of approach to how do we manage the transition out of this. Is there a glass half full approach to this, to say where are the opportunities of whether it be the technology roadmap or net zero emissions by 2050? How does the business evolve, and importantly, how does it partner with its customers as to be an active and positive player in that transition?
Yeah, no, look, it's a great question, Andrew. I firmly believe our role is to ensure that the capacity stays on as long as possible to enable the transition over the next decade. So your decisions have that at the forefront. What we're doing is, for example, we've got a skilled workforce here. I'll just use where I am right today. We've got a skilled workforce here of a couple hundred people. They would be able to be deployed to other, technologies, whether it be gas fire, whether it be hydrogen, whether it be renewables, right? There's connection, there's an established community, all the things you need. So we have a role to look at, can we grow out from what we have and leverage that capability? And when I say capability, I use it across that broad term, Andrew. And so we're doing that, actively doing that. And we've got a number of things which I can't get into, but we've got a number of things we're working on to try and achieve that. We are working directly with customers, because if you can attract load, right, if you can bring the load into the area, you actually help manage that as well. So we're actually, what does that look like? What can we provide to encourage the load or keep the load? That's just as important. So how do you make sure that manufacturing, which you often read about in the paper in terms of cost of energy being prohibitive, how do you make sure that you keep that load so it doesn't then exacerbate the other things? So to me, it's both, Andrew. But I absolutely believe that, within 2 decades, coal will be gone within Australia. I just can't see the speed of transition that we're seeing at the moment. There might be a little bit left, but it's just even the federal government is now recognising that in its roadmap, which I really applaud and encourage more of that better. I think it's going to be very difficult to see coal lasting beyond 2050.
Don't tell Matt Canavan.
No. Look, Matt and I, he's a smart guy, and he's passionate, and he loves the Central Queensland region, which you've got to applaud. But yeah, I have a different view on that.
And having a very clear plan for jobs of the future is everything. Really,
that's exactly right.
Totally.
And look, we supply very big industry, significant industry, which has thousands of jobs and is worth hundreds of millions to the state. And you've got to recognise your role in that and making sure that stays there. And how do you enable it to transition? So this is the other thing, in an affordable way. So that's what I was talking about earlier. We've got a key role to enable that to occur.
Claire, just a couple more things from me, and then one was just going back to Principle 1 and the sort of governance side of things, Andrew, and whether you've taken that step of embedding the actual customer voice into the boardroom or at the executive level, and whether you go to the end of the value chain for that purpose. You know, it's like, given where we're at now, having that voice, that sharp focus, you know, the social, what I would call the social policy voice,
Yep.
inside the boardroom could be really powerful.
So yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. So what we currently have is every month in my report, there's a description of what's going on Alinta, right? So there's it's embedded within that. There might be a standalone bit of information and a separate paper around that. So there's an active discussion every month about that. Then about what we're doing in the market and the products we're offering and what have you like that. So that's happening every single month. The survey that we did, the entire survey went to the board, full presentation, full report, and then the actions we're taking out of it. One of the things that we were going to adopt, and then COVID came along, and Andrew, I think, has been at one of these historically, I can't remember, but we have had boardroom engagement, and we wanted to pivot to, and that was on issues, or it might be a particular person. We actually got Rosemary Stanton to come and speak last year. I think, Andrew, you may have been at that. And we talked about the Energy Charter at the board level. We were wanting to engage with customers directly over the, like one a quarter over the year, and we obviously haven't been able to do that, but that's the intent. Where I'd like to see it go, though, is where you get that more direct, and that'll happen. It'll happen. That's the ambition. So we actually get the customer to come in, and whether it's one of our strategy sessions, where you've got the white space, more depth conversation rather than the sort of more performance-driven activity. So, and you got to create the right environment for the right discussions to occur. But that's where I'm looking to take the organisation over the next year. We joined the Energy Users Association. So one of the things we did on the back of last year as well, because we believe there's a great way to learn out of what comes out of that, and therefore how we can shape our strategy and our agenda. If we'd had a strategy day, I would have got Andrew to come along and actually, here's what the customer's saying. These are the issues, and I wanted that to come from him, not from me. So, that's still on the agenda, Andrew, so get ready.
When I'm allowed out of the house, Andrew, I'll be more than happy to.
Yeah. So look, Cassandra, that gives you an idea of where we're at. It's good. It's not where it should be, but it's certainly a lot more than where we were a year ago. And I really, and the chair is completely aligned with me on this. He really wants people to come into the boardroom. He loves external perspective, right? He celebrates it. It feeds him, in terms of his own energy. So the more of that we bring in, the better.
Yeah, and just giving thought to actual directorship positions, because that's real. When people leave the room, and that kind of dynamic. That's just something I'm, Claire, going to particularly be flagging.
Okay.
Because every board meeting is going to matter, as you know.
I agree. Look, Cassandra, one of the things is we don't get the choice of who gets appointed to our board. And I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
We can influence, we can suggest, but we ultimately don't get that choice.
Thank you. And then the engagement, structural engagement. You've obviously thinking about that, and again including at the exec level, sort of where all the operational stuff happens. Just the other one was you've referenced some of the community engagement, the 230,000 for those small grants. Just encouraging you to, without suggesting those be taken away, because they can often be very precious, important, small relationships that you've got that matter to your team. At this time, investing where you can in providing some of that financial support for the larger scale customer engagement in your local communities, so that there is some structure to what's coming in there.
Yeah.
And recognising, I think, communities need resourcing to be able to do the engagement. This could be an opportunity for you to expand.
Oh, look, Cassandra, I think one of the things I'm incredibly proud about with CS Energy, and this existed before me, is how mature that program is. So they do a series of applications and everyone gets a brief no matter whether they win or lose on that application. So they get told why so there's a complete feedback loop. I sit down every quarter with the mayors of the local areas to find out where are the pressure points that we should be aware of, and the CEOs of the councils about areas of concern. One of the things we did was we sold a whole lot of scrap metal. Power stations often have a lot of it. We reinvested that we did it out at Kogan's, so we reinvested that into the local community. So Lifeline got a big chunk, for example, which I think is exactly what you're talking about. And CareFlight, which is around, and these are really important services that the Downs region depends on. So we were very deliberate, and Drought Angels, we were very deliberate about investing that back into the community in an indirect way, which services the broader area where our people live and work. So it's very ingrained in CS. It's very mature, and I think it's something that the organisation does very well, and it existed prior to when I came into the organisation.
Andrew, I think that's a really good place to end. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, with the customers, community and advocates on here and the board and executive here, because if they aren't in direct connection and there aren't obstacles between them, then we don't get anywhere. I mean, as you know, culture starts from the top, and all these things that we're talking about need to be embedded at that senior board ELT level. So that's good to hear. Look, we have run out of time, but just to give you the last word, if you'd like it, is there anything else you would like to say to us about the Charter, the future, anything?
Oh, look, I think it's an incredibly worthwhile process that you guys bring, and the whole being a part of the Charter is I've given you some very specific examples of how it's had such a positive impact on CS Energy and its cultural journey and its strategy. I think, really helping on the issues, the big three for me next year: affordability, the transition, and just that confusion around what does the future look like, right? And I think that the Charter can have such a positive impact on navigating those three things next year, because I think those are the big three for 21.
Can I squeeze one more thing in, Claire? Sorry. Yep. Just as a quick follow-up question around the just transition and net zero by 2050. Do you think that you've got a role, or the industry has a role, to explain that transition, that coal is yesterday and we need to move forward?
Look, I could not reinforce the importance of that. And I think one of the real tragedies that's occurring at the moment is that ideology is driving a misinformed debate. And I think, sudden closure and withdrawal of coal is just going to have a very negative impact on customers. And I don't think and I think that everyone needs to own that, and not just one part of the industry. Everyone needs to own that, because what do we want? We want the transition to go as smoothly as possible. We're all acknowledging it's happening. So let's make sure we do it in a way which has the least impact on customers, right? So that's why we've all got that responsibility, and I couldn't emphasise that enough.
Yep.
And we don't have. I think it's dangerous when people start sort of providing misinformation and creating expectations for customers which then aren't realised. And I think that's where the Charter can help in terms of getting that information out there, that we all want the same thing, right? No matter where you sit on the spectrum. But let's do it in a way which actually manages the least impact on customers and the industry.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you. And then on that note, that's been very helpful. Thank you, Andrew. We appreciate your time and your frankness and your openness in the discussion. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah, mate.
I have stopped recording.